Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
Today, the FOMC raised our policy interest rate by 75 basis points.
The Federal Reserve raises interest rates again, but hints at a potential slowdown.
With Election Day countdown on, a look at some of the most hotly contested races with our Spotlight Politics team.
It's very competitive.
Plus some under-the-radar races that could be close on Tuesday.
Can moderate Republicans still win in Illinois? Burridge Mayor Gary Grasso thinks so. He shares his thoughts with us.
Hospital patients are supposed to know exactly what they're in for when it comes to cost, but are hospitals complying?
And it's also the right time in history for us to be contemplating these issues with immigrants.
And a musical collaboration tells the story of the Irish soldiers of Mexico.
But first, some of today's top stories. Stocks tumbled today after the Federal Reserve made history with a fourth straight three-quarter-point rate hike, or a jumbo hike. The Dow ended the day more than 500 points, or 1.6% down. We'll have more on the interest rate hike and how it could affect your wallet in just a moment.
A Chicago man has been charged with making a graphic death threat to Republican gubernatorial candidate Darren Bailey and his family. Scott Lennox, who describes himself as a political terrorist, is being charged with felony counts of threatening a public official and harassment. Lennox allegedly left a threatening voicemail to Bailey's Springfield office last week, leading the candidate and his family to request additional security. In a statement, Bailey says in part, "Whether we agree or disagree on politics, we are all Americans. I pray this young man gets the help he needs. We must bring our state together and fight for the safety and prosperity of every Illinoisan."
Faith leaders, community members, and local officials come together to voice support for victims wounded in this week's mass shooting in East Garfield Park. 14 people, including 3 children, were wounded in the shooting that happened Halloween night.
We have spoken and connected with the victims. 10 of them were part of one family. One parent experienced injury in 2 of her young children. So we know that some of them are being released. We know that one is still in critical condition and that there are 2 others who are in serious condition. So yes, we've been in contact with those. We've offered to support them in all of the ways that they need.
And police say victims had been gathered for a vigil when 2 unidentified occupants traveling in an SUV started shooting. We'll visit East Garfield Park tomorrow night as part of our In Your Neighborhood series to hear more about support for victims and anti-violence efforts.
Coming up in the program, some local under-the-radar races to watch on Election Day.
But up next, what the latest Federal Reserve interest rate hike means for you. So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Buying a home or financing a car just got even more expensive now that the Federal Reserve has announced yet another increase in interest rates. This one by 3/4 of a percentage point. It is the 6th interest rate hike this year, all in an effort to slow down inflation. Here to discuss this and how this latest increase could affect you are James Brewer, CEO at Envision Wealth Planning and former president of the Association of African American Financial Advisors, and Ed Stewart, professor of economics at Northeastern Illinois University. Thanks to you both for joining us. Ed, let's start with you, please. What's your reaction to this move by the Fed?
Well, it's not unexpected, although I'm less a fan of this continued tightening than many other economists and financial experts. I see it having a really damaging effect on the bottom half of the U.S. population that depends on credit and has more debts than assets. It's definitely hurting the ability of first-time home buyers. My daddy in Texas was a home builder, so I'm always acutely aware of interest rate effects on home building, and not just home building. It's appliances, plumbing, furniture, all of the things that go with furnishing and equipping a new house. And I think we're already seeing some of that in the demand for housing dropping and some real estate markets getting a lot softer. So I'm hoping that the Fed, they had a little bit of a hint, Brandis, that they may be slowing down. I think they've done enough, and I'd like them to stop.
And Ed, I want to come back to what you said a second ago about the impact on lower income members of the population. James, I want to come over to you. What is the likelihood of a recession if the Fed continues to raise rates?
Well, I try to not really too much on the recession side, but often it's what's in people's minds. We keep hearing, well, are we going into one? Are we going into one? Most people have never taken an economics class like with our professor here. So they just hear things and start seizing. And I think, what gets into the mind can then create, recession-like behavior, even though, we may not fully be there. So that's what I'm really concerned about with these continued moves, that it's just getting into the psyche of people.
And James, how does the Fed weigh the likelihood of a recession against, the risk of what happens if they don't raise interest rates?
Well, and I think that's a balancing act. I kind of look and say that we had historically low rates for a while, trying to correct for what happened during the quote unquote lost decade, sometimes called the Great Recession. But people then began to think, oh, this is how things are going to be. And then over time started thinking, oh, we're going to have low rates. So you had new home buyers come in who believed that the rates were always going to be this low, although that's not exactly how things were. So, I look and say, I believe that we made some smart moves to stem the, big problem that we had with the Great Recession. I'm just kind of concerned, are we overcorrecting too quickly but most of those minds are still around that we're making those decisions. So hopefully, they're going to come to the right decision. It's just that they've got some fears of the general population going right now.
So, Ed, back to your point earlier, how will, working class, middle income Americans be impacted differently from wealthier Americans?
Well, it's the difference between savers and borrowers. Now, there have been wealthy individuals hurt by the increase in interest rates because the stock market, as Paris alluded to at the beginning, has taken quite a hit in the last few months. And also, if you're been holding bonds, those prices go down as well. But if you're a very wealthy person with a lot of cash and short-term assets, then interest rates going up are going to increase your income and make you better off. For the bottom, at least 50% of the U.S. population, which has no assets, and because of historically low wages and slow wage growth, has had to depend on credit to get by month to month, this increase in interest rates is going to drive up credit card rates. Almost every credit card we have these days is an adjustable rate, so it goes with the prime rate. And as the Fed raises the federal funds rate, the prime rate goes up in an equal amount. And as the prime rate goes up, and your credit card rate, your personal loan rate, your auto loan, even if you're buying a used car, if you can find one that's affordable. So it's putting a real financial burden on a significant part of the U.S. population.
James, how should the average customer, all of that said, how should the average consumer weather these hikes?
Well, at some point, as a certified financial planner, I got to put in something about planning here. And sometimes it's when times are bad that people might start to plan. These are unwanted times. We always want, the good times to roll. But I think at some point we have to start saying, okay, I need to work on having something that, should this happen, I'm in an okay position. I think that very few people have really thought about, can I control my credit spending? I think the professor hit something that was important, and we've been hearing this for a while, that incomes, especially for the lower parts of the population, haven't been rising as fast as other aspects of certain costs have been rising. So that has been putting a pinch on them. But at some point, we need to start to think about, what can I really afford? Because I think some people that potentially were already overextended are just finding things are going to get worse as costs rise, as the cost of credit and interest rates rise. But just someplace, you do need to come up with some kind of plan that tries to get you back to even. It may not be during these challenging times, but at least get back to even when we get out of these unfortunate or unwanted times.
Probably some belt tightening for folks whose belts may already be a little bit taut. That's what we'll have to leave it. James Brewer and Professor Ed Stewart, thanks to you both for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And now to Paris and a local politician calling for moderate Republicans to raise their voices. Paris.
Brandis, Illinois Republicans used to be of a certain brand, fiscally conservative, socially moderate to even liberal. Republicans like former governors Jim Edgar and the convicted George Ryan were known to cut deals regularly with members across the political aisle. Our next guest says that the Republican Party needs to listen to those moderate voices to make an impact going forward in Illinois. Quote, socially moderate Republicans, still conservative at their fiscal core, must no longer acquiesce to the far right who insist on candidates who espouse intolerant social policies that easily allow Democrats to define us all too extreme to hold office. This was in an editorial in the Chicago Tribune this morning, and joining us as the author of that editorial, Gary Grasso, mayor of Burr Ridge. Mayor Grasso, good to see you again. So I mentioned some names, Jim Edgar, Judy Bartopinka. What do you think happened to that brand of Republican in Illinois?
It was shouted down and shunted away because of socially far-right conservative policies that don't accept a wide range of views anymore.
And things like gun rights, abortion rights, Illinois Republicans, you believe should stake out a more moderate position. Where should they be on those kinds of issues?
Well, first of all, they should be able to discuss them, Paris. Just discussing abortion, just discussing gun rights, still, I'm a Republican. But now the far right says, well, now you're not Republican. Well, that's wrong. That's the wrong way to approach it. Abortion in this state is a political reality. Let's try to fight the 15 weeks, parental notification. Let's consider no funding, no state funding, no federal funding. Some of the issues that I think other people will agree on. But most people don't want to take the right to make the choice away from a woman, even if that woman wouldn't choose abortion herself. That shouldn't divide Republicans to such an extent that we get far-right candidates who cannot get elected in the general.
And on gun rights, you say there should be some reasonable gun restrictions talked about.
Certainly about semi-automatic weapons. I've always said that. I mean, why should someone just be able to walk in and get a semi-automatic weapon? What's wrong with a background check? What's wrong with a mental health check? What's wrong with knowing why you need that gun? Just talking about semi-automatic weapons and some reasonable restrictions is not going to diminish the Second Amendment, and people should allow that discussion to go forward.
And do you believe this lack of moderate voices in the party means that it is going to cost your party seats in Illinois?
Oh, absolutely will. I think we'll see that in less than a week again. There's an old saying about trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It's the definition of insanity, I think, Albert Einstein. And I think the Republican Party has been doing that now for election after election after election. And we see diminished power at the state level and at the congressional level. We're going to lose another congressional seat at least this time around.
Although the trend seems to be in Illinois and elsewhere that the most conservative voices win out in the primary. They're the ones that activate the base, and the moderate voices just don't excite the base. You can't win a primary that way. What about that?
Unfortunately, I think that's a rule that's the playbook for most Republicans. I think they want to go as far right as possible. I think that's unfortunate, which is why I wrote the article that I wrote today. Moderate Republican voices have to stand up. They have to push back against that idea and say, look, it's okay to talk about abortion. It's okay to talk about gun rights. It's okay to talk about other things. And you don't have to worship at the altar of the far right.
Well, I should
just
jump
to
in
get
and
elected.
say in the gubernatorial primary, Richard Irvin was a candidate that was a little more opaque on those issues, I guess trying to brand himself as more of a moderate. He came in third. Darren Bailey, the conservative, won.
Yeah, and Jesse Sullivan came in second, another far-right conservative when it comes to placing religion in government, which I fundamentally disagree with.
So if that's where the base voters are, how do you change that?
You've got to get more Republican moderates to vote in the primaries. The turnout is abysmal. And the base will get excited, the far-right base will get excited and come out to vote. And they win if they come out to vote and the moderates don't vote.
You also see nationwide right now Republicans seeming to get ahead if they're election denialists, if they say Trump actually won 2020. Obviously, false claims of election fraud. Is that a good development for the party, for the nation?
As a moderate Republican, I don't believe that's a good development. I think we've got to move past that argument. I'm a lawyer. There hasn't been any evidence of that. Staying on that topic, I think, only undermines the credibility of our candidates and undermines, therefore, the Republican Party.
That said, as a moderate Republican, are you voting for Darren Bailey over J.B. Pritzker?
I'm going into my polling. Look, I'm not a fan of Governor Pritzker. I'm the mayor of Burr Ridge, and he and I cross paths. And because I asked for some information on the migrants coming to Burr Ridge, he called our community and me essentially racist. So
not a way to win your support there.
Not a way to win my support.
And as I understand with the migrants, they're no longer at that hotel in your community.
No, they were moved out. And the fundamental problem that existed from the beginning was that the governor actually thought the Burr Ridge was all in Cook County. When he realized he had sent them into DuPage County, his staff moved them out about 2 weeks later.
All right, so on that question of who you're going to vote for, you're still perhaps undecided?
I've decided.
Okay, but you don't want to say
right.
here.
I'm not a fan of Governor Pritzker.
All right. 2024, you're saying that is going to be the bellwether, then it seems like. You don't think much is going to change in Illinois in 2022, although if Donald Trump is the head of the party and he's the candidate for president, does he get your vote?
I don't know that right now. I really want to see how he campaigns. If he stays on his issues that I thought were very good, which included how we interact internationally, the southern border, I think he's absolutely right on that. And he gets to policy. If he gets off his personal attacks and he gets off some of the other issues, then I think he'll be a stronger candidate. I think he's got to get back to how he ran in 2016 and away from the election issues and some other things that he's been supportive of.
All right, Burr Ridge Mayor Gary Grasso, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Paris.
And now, Brandis, we toss it right back to you.
In Paris, we just heard from a suburban Republican mayor who is not on Tuesday's ballot about his party's chances this coming election cycle. Now let's look at some races that are up for grabs in Chicago's suburbs. Amanda Vinicky joins us with a look at some key contests that could end in either major party's favor. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, technically, of course, Tuesday is decision day, but a sizable number of races won't be decided then. That's because the winners were already settled over the summer in the primary. I'm talking about areas in Illinois that lean so Democratic or so Republican that the winner of the primary has a virtual lock on winning Tuesday's general election. Still, particularly in the Chicago suburbs, it is not always as cut and dried. There's real competition, like in DuPage County. Republican Dan Cronin has chaired the DuPage County Board for the past dozen years, but he's not running for re-election, so it's an open seat. One that Democrats hope to claim. State Representative Deb Conroy of Elmhurst says all 58 chairs of the DuPage County Board in the past have been Republican men, and it's time to change that.
You know, when I was first elected 10 years ago, I was the first Democrat out here, and everywhere I went, I was in a room filled with, I was the only woman. It was all white men, and they were all Republicans. And that is not the face of DuPage County today. It is very diverse. It's richly diverse.
There's no doubt that DuPage County looks and votes different than it did 50 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. But one thing that I'm certain of in my conversations with residents across this county, regardless of what political affiliation they may subscribe to, Republican, Democrat, or Independent, the issues that they care about continue to be the same.
As in, says Republican nominee Greg Hart, they want no more taxes, safe communities, and the opportunity for economic growth. Hart lives in Hinsdale and is currently on the county board. He's a management consultant. Private sector expertise, he says, is needed to run a county of some 1 million residents and with a budget approaching $1 billion.
DuPage County has always been a government that has been an exception to the Illinois rule, as I say. We balance our budget. We try to keep our tax levy as flat as we possibly can. We prioritize public safety. And I think those are the reasons why, out of all counties that are greater than 500,000 in population, DuPage was the only county in the state of Illinois that grew in population as of the last census. We're not going to continue that record of success by becoming more like Springfield, as my opponent wants to take us.
As for public safety, Hart says another top priority would be to hire more lawyers at the state's attorney's office and more officers with the sheriff's department. He's critical of Conroy's vote in Springfield for the criminal justice law that will eliminate in January cash bail in Illinois. Conroy stands by that vote and says it's unfair that people are locked up solely because they don't have money to pay bail. She helped secure state funds for a center in DuPage that will help those with mental health issues and addiction stay out of jail and instead get them treatment. Furthering those initiatives is among her top priorities.
So I think I'm certainly not going to tell you that things are not doing well in DuPage County. I'm very proud of DuPage County, but I feel there are a lot of things that we've only scratched the surface on. You know, the environment, there's so much more we can do with the environment. Mental health, we've only scratched the surface. And diversity, we should have a chief executive officer of diversity in DuPage County.
And by the way, Conroy stopped to talk to me while she was in the midst of knocking on doors trying to win voter support. So thanks to her, for that. Yeah, exactly.
Doing that. So Amanda, we all know Chicago is solidly in Democratic control, but what about Cook County?
Well, Cook County certainly does have some toss-ups, and let's key in there on the Cook County board. Right now, Republicans hold only 2 of the board's 17 districts. One of the incumbent Republicans, Sean Morrison, is running again against Democrat Dan Calandrillo. The other, Peter Silvestri, not running again after 28 years representing the 9th District. The newly redrawn district stretches from River Forest in the southeast to Palatine on the southwest. And while the opponents may not agree on much, both candidates vying for that seat say it could go either way.
Probably one of the most competitive Cook County board districts of the 17 districts.
This is one of probably 4 Cook County board races that is actually in play.
Democrat Maggie Trevor, who grew up in Rolling Meadows, has a background in healthcare. Improving Cook County's healthcare and hospital systems is her top focus. From building up a wider network of doctors to more mental health services, she says they're currently grossly underprovided. And in the wake of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Trevor says expanding capacity for reproductive care will be critical.
There needs to be a build out of capacity for obstetrics and gynecology in general, but reproductive health services in particular are going to be impacted. So I think that's what's at stake here. We need to make sure that that happens, and that happens across the district, not just in the 9th District, but in all our healthcare facilities.
Republican Matt Pogorski grew up in Northwest Chicago and works in logistics. He says when he talks to voters, healthcare doesn't come up. He says they're focused on kitchen table issues like the economy, even the Chicago Bears' potential move to Arlington Heights, and also crime.
So my top 3 things I'm focusing on are crime. I want to hold Kim Foxx accountable and really start to get this electronic monitoring program under control. I want to convert the gas tax, which is partially per gallon based, and a sales tax on top of that. I want to get rid of the sales tax portion of it and convert that into a per gallon fee.
Podgorski also backs a plan to direct money toward pension debt with a long-term effect of, he says, reducing property taxes. Now, both Trevor and Podgorski made it out of competitive primaries to win their respective parties' nominations.
Amanda, any other races to highlight?
Well, yeah, sure, Brandis. There are some suburban legislative races. Don't look for the General Assembly to change hands. Democrats will still maintain control, but Republicans certainly hoping to take some. And as for the Cook County Board, the 9th, 14th and 15th Cook County Board districts could swing. Speaking of the Cook County Board, there is, of course, a race for board president between incumbent Tony Preckwinkle and now Republican Bob Fioretti, though that is not thought of as truly competitive. And then don't forget, in the suburbs, there are 2 rare Illinois Supreme Court races, and those races could determine which party holds the majority on the state's high court. And Brandis, we have, of course, covered those before, so voters should check out our website to learn more.
They sure will. And Amanda, of course, we will see you later in Spotlight Politics. Thank you.
Till then, my fellow purple friend.
Purple friend. We got the memo today. And for more on local races, be sure to check out our WTTW voter guide. Hear from the candidates in their own words on why they want your vote. That's at WTTW.com/voter guide. We're back with more right after this. Do you think there's been sort of a rethinking of how those events happened here in Chicago?
I made a promise to myself in my career that every year I would make a piece of art dedicated to the memory.
Got into a zone of mentor to children. See what we can do to kind of elevate each other. We all we got at this point.
I'm using my past to push forward, to build a movement to create the world that we all want to see.
Immigrants to America often encounter ethnic and religious prejudice in their adopted country. Throughout Chicago's history, that struggle for acceptance has marked the experience of two of the city's largest immigrant populations, the Irish and Mexican communities. But that's not the only experience those groups share. Though an ocean separates their homelands, Irish and Mexican soldiers also fought for Mexican sovereignty during the Mexican-American War of the late 1840s. Now, that unlikely alliance has inspired a musical production created by two of Chicago's masters of traditional music. Erica Gunderson has the story.
Tu corazón irlandés, mi corazón mexicano. Con profunda admiración, hoy quiero estrechar tu mano. And that's how he welcomes John Riley to Mexico.
How is it that I should organize this company of brave men is a story of the heart, maybe one of sound. My name is John Riley, captain of the San Patricios Battalion.
By any measure, the story of St. Patrick's Battalion is extraordinary. During the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848, a group of Irish immigrants deserted the U.S. Army to fight instead alongside Mexican soldiers. But however remarkable the story might be, it's a chapter of history that's not especially well known in the U.S.
The U.S. was expanding westward, had declared a war against Mexico, and the newly arrived Irishmen had signed up for the U.S. Army, and they sent them on the front lines to shoot at Mexicans. But when they realized they were shooting at Catholics, they had a change of heart.
There was a sense of righteous anger with these guys when they deserted.
Those Irishmen were court-martialed and shot or hung for treason. And never spoken about much again in U.S. history. But in Mexico, there's streets named after them. There's a museum. They're heroes in Mexico.
Musicians Juan Diaz and Sean Cleland have made it their mission to bring the ballad of El Batallón de San Patricio to the masses. In two performances this month, Diaz, Cleland, and their respective ensembles are joining forces to tell the story of Los San Patricios through music, poetry, and dance. Diaz and Cleland's collaboration began when they worked together about 20 years ago to create a performance about Michael Hogan's book, The Irish Soldiers of Mexico.
We were teaching at the Old Town School. At some point, we were put together to do a gig. And we said, what are we going to do? We're like, well, we both do things in 6/8 jig rhythms, 1 2 3 4 5 6, 1 2 3 2 2 3. We thought, well, we'll just start with that.
We have a lot of instruments in common. We have fiddles, we have percussive dance, we have harps, we have similar rhythms that we use. So that was easy to find those common denominators.
Diaz and Cleland have restaged the performance a few times since then, adding new elements with each production. They say that Chicago is the perfect place to sing this ultimately tragic tale of brothers in arms.
We had dreams, we had songs to sing. It's so lonely around the field.
This is possible because of our historic connections of our two ethnic groups, is the particular energy that we get from being immigrants to the city of Chicago and being connected to the energy of this place. This is a great city.
I hope people reflect on the similarities with the present day, that maybe history repeats itself in some ways, that it's good to reach across ethnic boundaries, you know, and collaborate, because that is the wellspring of creativity and innovation when you do this type of collaboration.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
Very cool mix of musical styles there. There'll be 2 performances of Los San Patricios, the Irish Soldiers of Mexico, this month. Friday, November 11th at the Irish American Heritage Center of Chicago and November 16th at the Beverly Arts Center. You'll find more on that on our website. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a federal law is supposed to ensure hospital bill transparency for patients, but it might not be that simple. We'll talk about navigating the billing department of the healthcare system. And Election Day is less than a week away, if you can believe it. Our Spotlight Politics team dissects the tightening races to watch. But first, some more of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot's $16 billion budget proposal is set for a final vote on Monday. The City Council's Budget and Finance Committees voted to advance the proposal today, but not without debate. Some older people critiqued the budget for not including a Department of Environment to improve efforts against climate change. They point to Lightfoot's campaign promise of reestablishing the department. Budget Director Susie Park vows to conduct a study over the next 7 months on how to create that department. There are shortcomings in some of the Chicago Police Department's strategies to support employees' mental health. That's according to the city's Office of Inspector General, who looked into 2 of the department's mental health strategies. The OIG says it found that one support program falls short on proper staffing and training and made 13 recommendations to solve those issues. In response to the report, CPD provided a 6-month timeline to implement some of those recommendations. And if you haven't already, you've got about 2.5 hours to buy your Powerball ticket because that massive jackpot is still up for grabs. This time, it's an estimated $1.2 billion, billion with a B. The jackpot is the second largest in Powerball history and is the biggest prize in more than 6 years. The odds of winning the jackpot, not so large. 1 in 292 million. Numbers are set to be drawn at 9:59 Central Time. I gotta go buy my ticket. But now to Paris for a look at cost transparency efforts at hospitals across the country. Paris.
Brandis, a federal law is supposed to ensure hospital patients know exactly what they're in for when it comes to costs. The hospital price transparency rule requires hospitals in the U.S. to provide clear and accessible pricing information about services they provide. It hasn't exactly worked as advertised. A report by a patient advocacy group finds that only 16% of hospitals are complying with the rule. And joining us are David Blumenthal, president of the Commonwealth Fund, which promotes high-quality, accessible, and equitable health care. Sandra Washington, board-certified patient advocate of MedHelps based in Chicago, MediHelps that is, and Cynthia Fisher, founder and chairman of PatientRightsAdvocate.org. Welcome all of you here to Chicago Tonight. Cynthia, let's start with you. This new federal rule has been in effect for a year. Remind us what it requires hospitals to do.
Yes, the hospital price transparency rule starting January 1st, 2021, near now 21 months into the law, where all hospitals are to post all of their prices by every single procedure and every single health plan that they accept, even the discounted cash prices. And unfortunately, as you said, only 16% of the nation's hospitals are in compliance with this law, essentially keeping patients still blind to no prices, able to be blindsided by overcharged bills, and still having to pay with a blank check because they don't have access truly to price transparency in healthcare.
And I want to get into the lack of compliance in a minute, but David Blumenthal, one of the intended goals here is to perhaps bring prices down. If consumers know what they're in for, they can shop around. Maybe hospitals make the price more competitive. Has it worked that way?
I'm totally supportive of price transparency. I think it's an essential step to creating and testing whether we can have real markets, which is what you're talking about when you ask for consumers to be good purchasers based on price. My problem is that as a physician who practiced primary care for 35 years and as a health policy expert, I can't make heads or tail of the prices that are quoted to me. And I think the consumers need much, much more than just price transparency. Price transparency is a first step on a long journey toward functioning healthcare markets if that is ever going to be possible.
Well, David Blumenthal, when you say you can't make heads or tails, what are consumers looking at when they're looking at however these are formatted in charts or websites or what have you?
So the analogy I like to make is that when you buy a car, you don't get the prices of the spark plugs and the carburetor and the exhaust system and the radio and the vinyl covers of the chair. You don't get all those separately. You get a single package, and you judge whether the price is right from that single price. Price transparency, literally, by every procedure, by every medication, by every test, is the equivalent to getting all those components of the car without getting the total price of the car. It's not going to help consumers make good choices. It might help if someone else, a company, a startup, Apple, Google, takes those prices and turns them into car prices, sticker prices, for whatever the consumer is having to consume.
So it might give patients more of a headache. And Sandra, that's what your organization, MediHelps, does. You work with patients in Chicago as a patient advocate. What have you and patients seen as you try to navigate this?
Especially in the marginalized and under the underserved communities, as well as those patients that have chronic health conditions, we've seen a whole lot of confusion, mass confusion, and that's because the word price transparency is put out there, just like David just stated, is put out there, but no one is really educating the patient who is already going through so much on what exactly price transparency is and how price transparency works. So
Sandra, Washington,
the patient education piece.
And who would be the best? Would the insurance company play a role in this? Who could step in and help the patient here?
You do have independent patient advocates such as myself, which can offer the patient unlimited options. You also have community-based, not so much community-based, but facility-based advocates who can also help the patient. However, it's a follow the money trail. So a lot of times the facility-based advocates cannot tell a patient all that there is to know. So it's best that they do go ahead and reach out to an independent advocate such as myself for help in understanding exactly what price transparency is and how it works.
And Cynthia, as you alluded to earlier, you looked at compliance here. You found that only 16% of hospitals and providers are complying. Why is that? Do they face penalties for not complying?
Yes, the penalties are up to $2 million per hospital, but sadly, Health and Human Services has only fined 2 hospitals in this country with the monetary fines of over $1 million. And immediately we saw excellent files being posted by those 2 fined hospitals. So the opportunity is for every hospital to post all of their prices. And as David alluded to, is this data needs to be unleashed to create a market, to create a functional and competitive market. Because Paris, there is wide price variation even for the same services on the same day. And why would anyone want to pay $3,000 for an MRI when they could see another plan or they could pay the discounted cash price in the same hospital for $300? So when you see a 10 times difference in price variation in the same hospital on the same day, consumers will not tolerate being overcharged. And this is the great reveal. It's the very beginning. And as David alluded to, it's the opportunity now for tech developers to help develop shopping applications like Kayak or Google Flights or Orbitz or Expedia Priceline did for the airlines. But this is the very beginning, and it's the beginning to get the data out into a marketplace. So we commend the hospital for complying.
Certainly an opportunity there. So David Blumenthal, that was going to be my next question. Does this rule take into account the fact that hospitals have different ledgers for non-insured patients versus insured patients, and then depending on what your plan is, certain procedures cost completely different amounts?
Well, my understanding of the regulation, and I'm not an expert on it, is that it's supposed to make sure that everyone's prices are revealed, regardless of who they're insured by or if they're not insured. And that detail is essential, but it's also very confusing. So it is absolutely true, as Cynthia said, that one plan may pay $3,000 for an MRI and another $300. But if you're going to see the doctor for a bad back that then requires surgery, the same plan may pay that charges 10 times as much, or for an MRI may pay 1/10 as much for the surgery. So it's seeing it all together.
Yeah, go ahead and finish that. Yeah, obviously it's all very confusing for the patient. Sandra, I just wanted to ask you, what is your general advice? I know every case is different, but what is your advice to patients that are super worried about incurring medical debt, but they have to go into the hospital and they have to get procedures?
My one suggestion, and I highly encourage this to all patients, is to use your voice. Use your voice. Call your insurance company, speak to your insurance company reps, ask them, questions, where can you find? A lot of insurance companies already were listing the information on their website. It's just that a lot of patients didn't know where to go get that information. But I highly encourage them to use their voice, to speak to, their doctor is sending them somewhere and, they're not sure whether it's in network or how much it'll cost. To use their voice with their doctor, with their insurance company, to find out just how much it's going to cost them. So at least they have a guide that they can actually go by. And once again, reach out to a patient advocate. There's a directory, it's called gnanow.org. It's advocates from all over the country that are independent advocates. And because, once again, we're independent, we have the opportunity to offer all the options so that patients are aware of where they're going and what they're getting and what is their responsibility once they get there.
All right, very, very helpful tips. Sounds like this is, very, very quickly, Cynthia, go ahead.
There's, the law requires all hospitals to post their prices on their websites and also to show the actual prices of the 300 most common shoppable services to make it easy for consumers. So that is in the law now, that anybody should be able to go to a website. And it's going to be the tech companies to harmonize that data and provide us mobile shopping apps in the future to prevent.
This is just a first step here, and that more steps need to be taken here for transparency and price controls. And our thanks to David Blumenthal, Sandra Washington, and Cynthia Fisher. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team and the battle over money and pledges in the governor's race. So please stay with us.
It may be hard to believe, but the midterm election is less than a week away on November 8th. Some folks who are not surprised are our Spotlight Politics team because they're here to shine a light on some of the races to watch. Welcome back, Amanda Venicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So let's start with the governor's race. There is an anti-J.B. Pritzker PAC at work on the South and West sides attempting to suppress black votes. Heather, what do you know?
Well, politics is a zero-sum game, right? You either got to get people to vote for you, or you've got to get people not to vote for the other guy, and that's what this strategy is. Now, it's the same PAC that we've been talking about since it seems like the dawn of time, funded by Dick Uihlein, run by Dan Proft, and this has sort of very targeted messages seeking to sort of make black people on the South and the West side say, hey, maybe I don't want to vote for J.B. Pritzker, because that is really one of the few ways this math could work out on Tuesday for Republican Darren Bailey.
Amanda, meanwhile, the man who left a death threat on Republican candidate Darren Bailey's phone was charged with felonies. What happened there?
Well, he's out, I believe, on electronic monitoring, but he left a voicemail that was really horrific. Talked about, I'm sorry to say this, and warning, but skinning Bailey alive, feeding him to Bailey's family. I know where you live. accusing Bailey of being racist. So I do think this is sort of part and parcel of a lot of the harassment and sort of horrifying things that we are seeing happen. Sometimes threats that are caught and ultimately taken seriously, particularly after what happened with U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. So I think it would be a frightening time for some elected officials, and Bailey does now have some law enforcement with him, not something that would typically be accompanying a gubernatorial candidate.
Should mention that both candidates handled this probably in the way you would want them to handle it. Bailey condemning it, but also saying, hope this guy gets some help, because clearly this guy is disturbed, as it seems in the Pelosi case, too, a disturbed individual. Pritzker condemning it, House Speaker Welch condemning it. So, you know, when these things have happened, public officials have sometimes fallen short in their condemnation. In this case, it seems like they both handled it the only way you really can.
Because it certainly is disturbing. Meanwhile, J.B. Pritzker is tapping his trust to give significant donations to judicial races, and the GOP is crying foul. Paris, is this legal?
Well, the State Board of Elections says no, it is not. And the issue here is a state law that passed recently that Governor Pritzker signed that limits...
Wait, let's key in on there. That Governor Pritzker himself signed.
He had signed. Part of this law was thrown out by the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way. But the part that's kept intact says you can't give more than $500,000. So he's given $500,000 to these judicial races. So to skirt that, as the Sun-Times wrote about this morning, he is using his trust to give another $500,000. And of course, he cares about these races because, as Amanda mentioned earlier, the balance of the state Supreme Court is up. 4-3 Republican Democratic balance. We don't know which way it's going to go. So obviously, he has a rooted interest. But the State Board of Elections, not illegal unless the Republicans want to challenge it and maybe they do an investigation.
But it'll be too late, presumably, for any of that money. And guess what? Pritzker's got the money to pay any sort of potential fine.
Well, and I'm no math whiz, but that sounds like $1 million each from some of Pritzker's buckets. So that is a substantial.
Brandis.
Look
You
at
get
me,
an
ding,
A.
ding, ding. But that is a substantial investment, it sounds like. Meanwhile, Amanda, the two candidates for governor pushing each other to accept post-election pledges. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Brandis, and this is something that has kind of been seen as, oh, is this, just sort of like tacky, flashy, but also I think there is some seriousness behind it. You have Bailey trying to say that Pritzker should say, not just that he intends to serve out his term as governor, but that he in fact will, and this is of course because Pritzker has been mentioned on some national stages as potentially going for a bid for the White House, should especially Biden not run for a second term. And then you have Pritzker wanting Bailey to vow that he is going to accept the results of the election, saying that he has some deniers of the 2020 election on his campaign team. Both teams have said, again, Pritzker saying, I intend to serve out my term as governor, and Bailey saying, yes, I will accept the terms, and I have been saying that.
So let's move over to the U.S. Senate race between Senator Tammy Duckworth and Attorney Kathy Salvi. Their only joint appearance was here on WTTW, where things got heated over PPP loans. Take a look.
I'll tell you one thing you did with that $1.9 trillion spending boondoggle. You said that it goes to the school. Well, it doesn't. In fact, you had an opportunity to keep PPP funds from prisoners, probationers, and parolees, and you voted against that bill.
I believe your law firm took those PPP funds, $200,000 worth, and you applied for the forgiveness, so you never paid those back. I think it is hypocritical. I supported the PPP fund. I supported your law firm getting the PPP funds, but I do think it's hypocritical to ask for loan forgiveness for yourself and your law firm, but not for students.
Heather, no love lost between these two?
It was a tense debate, I really have to say. Now, this has been a Senate race that has been under the radar. I think most people think that Tammy Duckworth is likely to be reelected since Illinois is a Democratic state. But it's clear they have sharp differences, and they were on full display during that debate.
So let's talk about a few congressional races to watch. Amanda, the 14th congressional district, represented by Democrat Lauren Underwood, leans Republican. The Cook Political Report has shifted the race between her and Republican Scott Grider from likely Democratic to leaning Democratic. What do you know?
Well, so Brandis, this is among, I believe, 10 House districts that were comfortably won by Biden that have now been flipped to really having sort of Republicans having a chance, more so than I thought. And I'm kind of curious as to see how this turns out, because you have to figure that more attention would have been given to these races not just by, frankly, journalists, but also the parties. Had both of the parties thought that there really was a chance that they would flip. And we haven't seen that sort of national money funneling into Illinois. I do think this is an indication that some of what we've been hearing on the national front, that the GOP is rising in polls, that economy is first and foremost, and the issue of abortion kind of hitting the backbench is what might be coming into play here.
But I should say that these races tightening, and I completely agree with that, the economy issue seems to be trending in Republicans' favor in the latest polls, and this is no different. But it might be why President Biden is part of why President Biden and Vice President Harris are coming here next week to campaign. I don't know if they're going to campaign in these districts, but you also have the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, coming to this area to campaign with some of these candidates. So we've also seen Dick Uihlein again pour additional money into some of these races. Maybe Republicans think these are gettable seats, and if that's the case, that would indicate this is going to be a sweep of the House for Republicans. If that's what happens, these should be safe for Democrats, but we just don't know, and it's all going to hinge on turnout.
So the Cook Political Report also made the same shift in the 6th congressional district, a race pitting incumbent Democrat Sean Casten against Republican Keith Pekow. Races tightening, many Illinois races are tightening, according to a recent poll. But Heather, what did we learn from the 2016 election about polls?
So if you're looking at a poll, you got to have a whole big shaker of salt right next to you. You cannot take it as gospel. As Paris said, it's all going to come down to turnout. It's a cliche. But this is the last week of the campaign. Nobody knows nothing. It will all change based on who comes out to vote. And I think this year in particular, there's so much anxiety and turmoil and just confusion because, of course, abortion, a major issue in a way that we have not seen for more than a decade. Nobody knows what that will mean in the suburbs, particularly where we saw women, suburban moms turn out to turn the House over in 2018. We don't know what they're going to do this year. That's why we're in this business.
So a couple of troubling trends this midterm election as well. Amanda, there's a texting campaign giving voters misinformation on where to go on Election Day. Is telling folks to go to the wrong place illegal?
Well, what we know so far is that the State Board of Elections has sent out a warning saying, hey, this does not come from us. The Chicago Elections Board, no, this is, as you noted, third party, so don't do that. Don't pay attention to it. It is, I think, sort of creepy in general when you have campaigns, when you have any effort like this, well-intentioned as it may be to try to drive up the vote and get out the vote. Of course, if you want to purposely steer people to the wrong place, we don't know if that is what is behind this or if it's just, again, sort of a campaign gone wrong. But no, just check the polling information that you have. And remember, you can register to vote on Election Day.
In city news, Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia conducted a poll showing him winning in a head-to-head mayoral race against current mayor Lori Lightfoot. Paris, he's running for Congress again. What are the chances he jumps into the mayor's race this late?
Well, if you believe some of the rumblings out there, the chances are getting better and better that he wants to jump in, especially this poll that he put out saying he would stand a very good chance of winning. The thing is, it's very late in the game. He needs to get 12,500 valid Chicago signatures to get on the ballot, which means you got to collect 2 to 3 times more than that total. If anyone can do that in a truncated period of time, he can. He's got a big organization to do that. He's got until November 28th to do that. So he's going to have to make his decision pretty soon. We assume it's not going to happen before the midterm election, but it would probably have to happen very short order after that.
And by the way, the poll saying that he would win in a matchup against Lightfoot. What we don't know is whether he would get to that point and who would make it to a runoff. Therein lies the first contest and the first big question.
Can I say, why didn't I get the purple memo tonight?
You missed the meeting.
I missed the text thread.
We forgot you. Sorry. So real quick before we go, CTU, though, backing Brandon Johnson in this race. But the powerful union, we know this. We've talked about it. They backed Garcia in his bid to unseat Rahm Emanuel. How much help was the CTU last time, Heather? And how much will not having their support hurt Chuy this time?
Well, it would be a totally different campaign for Chuy Garcia if he runs again. He will have to run on the strength of his own political organization, and he will not be able to rely on the Chicago Teachers Union because the Chicago Teachers Union is fully behind Brandon Johnson. He is one of their own. He is a founding member of United Working Families, which is really the teachers union political arm. They are all in for him. Remember, they endorsed him even before he formally launched his campaign. It would be very different than 2015, 2019, when the teachers union backed Tony Preckwinkle, who of course lost to Lori Lightfoot. 2023 is going to be its own beast.
It's interesting now that you mention it. I mean, for all the power that CTU has, right, from their organization and everything.
Numbers, money.
Their last two candidates did not win.
Correct. And, you know, I think an open question is whether Brandon Johnson's relationship with the teachers union will prove to be more of a benefit or a hindrance, because you talk to people and sometimes they get really angry about the teachers union.
Okay. And obviously, we'll be back here next Wednesday after Election Day. That is Spotlight. Thanks to Paris, Amanda, and Heather. And we are back to wrap things up. But first, a look at the weather.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night, live at 7. Anti-violence efforts in East Garfield Park as the community mourns following this week's mass shooting. We have a live report.
And evolving views of sexuality and romance are highlighted in a show of historic artwork at a Chicago exhibition space. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.